Okay, in terms of the stuff, as always, just bad news. Someday good news, but not today. Deadlines coming up are the quizzes for part 1 in the Blackboard in the folder there. Syllabus quiz and 4 normal quizzes. Deadlines at September 18th at end of day, so this Friday, end of day, 11:59 p.m. Example 1, quizzes part 2, deadline to file October 16th. Exam 2, quizzes part 3, deadline November 13th. Exam 3, exam 4, quizzes part 4, deadline December 4th. And again, these are all end of day. Then exam number 5, the final, deadline to file is on Friday, December 11th at noon. For the paper, I'm going to do a draft. Deadline for that's at November 16th, which is turned in, printed. For the final version of the paper, +5 deadline, November 18th on Blackboard. Full credit deadline, November 25th, also on Blackboard. Half credit deadline, December 4th, also on Blackboard. And also Monday, September 28th, I've got the jury duty, and so I'll be jurying rather than being here. And I'll put up a video for the class, and depending if I get picked or not, we'll see how it goes from there. I get summoned to a lot of jury duty. This will be my 5th time since 2010, but I've yet to be picked. But this could be my lucky day. I could be jurying. Usually when I say I'm a philosopher, they say, we don't want none of that.
For the draft, you print it out and behind it too.
Yep, that way I can mark it up and put comments on and get it back to you. Okay, so last time we're looking at the various moral methods. Again, the main purpose of these is kind of twofold, well, threefold. One, of course, is for the tests and quizzes and stuff. Secondly, for the paper for the course, but also to be able to have various methods and tools for moral reasoning in actual life. Now, one of the go-to methods is, that I myself use quite a bit, is appeal to consequences. And if you're doing a paper and you're not sure, like, how should I argue this, what method should I use, this one can work with almost anything. So if you're ever at a loss as to what to go with, this one's pretty good. One reason for this is because it has a very nice and sort of easy structure to it. It's easy to make the argument. It also has a very straightforward way to respond to it and to counter it. And so it's a very useful method for moral argumentation. Now, to provide a little background, appeal to consequences rests theoretically on what's known as consequentialism. We'll see a lot of this in part 2 when we talk about the moral theories, but the basic idea is this. If you're a consequentialist, the way you make decisions, at least things you're a consequentialist about, is by assessing, shockingly enough, the consequences. It's something we've all done. We'll weigh like the pros, the cons, the pluses, the minuses, the harms, and the benefits. And from the standpoint of the consequentialist, what you do is this. If you're deciding what to do, you would look at the pluses, the benefits, the positive things, and weigh those against the negative things, the harms, the cons, etc., and then you weigh them. And in general, if the pros, the pluses, etc., the benefits outweigh the negative, then that would be the decision to make. And if the reverse is true, that would be the decision not to make. For example, to use an everyday example, when you're deciding what phone to buy, what you do is if you're making a rational choice, you look at the consequences. If I buy this phone, what are the likely consequences? If I buy that phone, what are the likely consequences? In terms of like how good it will be for me to use it, how happy I'll be, how satisfied I'll be, etc. Use another example from life. When picking a major, you can use the same sort of thing. Look at what are the pros to majoring in this versus the negative sides. Also applied to picking who you're going to marry, or if you plan on getting married. What are the pros of the person, the marriage in general? What are the minuses? Now, the appeal to consequences of that sort, as we can see, is not a moral argument. So, for example, if I decide to stick with my existing phone because the new iPhone is pretty expensive, and I know they're going to come out with a brand new one in a little while anyways, that's not really moral reasoning. It's not good or evil. I'm just engaged in, a practical appeal to consequences. Similarly, if I pick, my major based on the chance of, getting employed, the salary, etc., it's not really a moral argument. It's a practical argument. So what would be the sort of moral version of this? Well, that's typically grounded in what's called utilitarianism. We'll look at this in part 2. And there are many varieties of utilitarianism, but oversimplifying things a bit, the basic idea of utilitarianism is actions are morally good based on their tendency to produce positive consequences, and morally bad based on their tendency to produce negative consequences. And so it works very similar to the normal appeal to consequences, except it has that moral aspect in there. And since this is a paper on ethics, we'd always want to include that moral aspect. So that's the theoretical foundation. So the general foundation is consequentialism. Things should be assessed based on consequences. And the moral foundation is typically utilitarianism, that things that are good or bad are good or bad based on the weighing of the positive and negative consequences. So what's the method itself? Well, the method, as we'll see, is very straightforward, which makes it sort of ideal for template argument. In fact, you can take just about almost any moral issue and lay it out in this template. So the first step in making the argument is typically you lay out the pluses, the positive aspects, the plus, the benefits, the pros. So you'd lay out all the positive stuff. Here's the good stuff. Secondly, you'd present, if you're doing a fair assessment, you'd lay out all the negative stuff, all the harms, all the cons. Third step is you do the weighing. So that back. I cannot pick that up. I could, but I would never get off the floor again. Thank you very much. You've saved me from both pain and humiliation. And I appreciate that. So then you weigh them against each other, and the idea is typically if the positive outweighs the negative, then good. If the negative outweighs the positive, bad. Now if you're making a moral argument, you need to include a fourth step. Namely, there has to be a link to morality. You have to provide some reason as to why weighing positive and negative is the way you assess things morally, to make that connection. And then fifth, you draw the appropriate conclusion, that it's good or bad. Now, returning to the very important point of making the link to morality, why does it have to be done? Well, if we're just weighing the positive and the negative, and we say, positive weighs negative, this is what you should do, it need not be moral at all. And I'll give a couple examples of this. We could take, for example, someone who's argued about cheating in a relationship. And a person might put up as one of the negatives, getting like disease. Now, if a person says, well, you shouldn't cheat in a relationship because of disease, that's really by itself not a moral argument. It's more of a health argument. You don't want to get diseased, don't do that. And it's not moral, it's medical. Or if someone says, if someone cheats, they're likely to be retaliated against, keying of the car type of deal. That would give a person a practical reason. If someone says, yeah, I really want to cheat on people, but I'm afraid my stuff will get busted, they're not really being good, they're just being practical. They don't want their stuff being busted. So without the link to morality, it wouldn't be a moral argument. It could be a practical one, it could be a medical one, but not moral. And the most common mistake people make is not including that moral link. So a good question B is, how do I transform my appeal to consequences to a moral argument? Well, it's pretty simple. One of the easiest ways to do this is to use applying a moral theory. As I mentioned, our good dead friend John Stuart Mill argued at great length for the principle of utility. So what you could do is plug into step 4, essentially Mill's theory. You could say, according to John Stuart Mill's argument of utilitarianism, actions are good as they tend to promote happiness, and bad as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. Given that John Stuart Mill is an authority on moral philosophy, this seems to be a reasonable thing to accept. So, applying moral theory / argument from authority, moral link made. And it nicely transformed it from just a practical argument to a moral argument. Now, another way to make the link would be to sort of use an appeal to intuition. You might say, intuitively, if something creates more harm than good, that would seem to make it the wrong thing to do, because harm is intuitively seen as a bad thing, benefits as good things. And in reverse, of course, that which is beneficial and helpful would seem to be a good thing, and something that is harmful would be seen to be as bad. So if it creates more benefits than harms, that would seem to be good. But again, probably the easiest way to do it is just, bring in our good dead friend John Stuart Mill to make the connection. He wrote a book on it, so problem solved.
So when you said you're supposed to, I guess if you're trying to make an argument, if you just make a plain argument and not the morality argument, is you say that it's okay not to state the morals in your paper?
Yes, if you weren't doing a paper in ethics, suppose you're just making an argument, suppose you're a doctor and you're trying to convince your patient not to smoke. You wouldn't bring like a moral argument, you wouldn't say you're evil, you'd probably say, well, here are all the harms of smoking. If you keep smoking, you have a good chance of getting emphysema, lung cancer, short lifespan, damage to the teeth, all sorts of problems. And that would be an appeal to consequences, basically saying, here's the negatives from smoking, there are no positives, therefore you shouldn't smoke. It wouldn't be a moral argument. Now for the paper, since the paper is a moral paper, you would want to include that, the moral part. And it's just a relatively small thing, but it's kind of critical. To use a crappy analogy, it's kind of like connecting the battery to in your car. Just put it in there. It's a small thing, but if you don't have the battery connected, that car is going nowhere. Similarly here, if you want to make a moral argument, you got to include the moral link.
If someone said they didn't want to cheat because they didn't want to lose the other person's trust, would that be immoral?
It depends on if you made that connection. If someone just says, if their argument is you shouldn't cheat because you lose the other person's trust, and this will be disadvantageous and harmful to you and will harm your relationship, that would be like a practical relationship advice. If you want to keep your relationship going, don't cheat. Now you could make it into a moral argument. The idea there would be to lay out the harms, bring in, you could just use the John Stuart Mill thing about utilitarianism, and that would make it into a moral argument. So all you have to do is just put in that bit, like, cheating relationship can lead to damage to the person's trust. This would destroy the relationship. This would outweigh the benefits of cheating. Morality, John Stuart Mill, utilitarianism, blah blah blah. Therefore, cheating would be wrong. So you could take, interestingly, boringly enough, you can take almost any appeal to consequences that's not moral and just bring in that moral link. Then you could take the smoking one, for example. I could say the doctor could argue, here's all the harms for smoking. According to John Stuart Mill in utilitarianism, he argues that what is wrong is actions that tend to promote unhappiness over happiness. Smoking will create more harm, therefore smoking is wrong. And so you can take just about any appeal to consequences and put in that moral element. Now, since the method is so useful, let's walk through an example how that would be done, and also look at how one could respond to it. And we'll go, since we're using this example, we can use cheating in a relationship. So to make the argument work, what we do first is this. And this is how to sort of construct the argument pretty easily. First thing to do is consider the pluses. So you don't, by giving examples of pluses, you don't actually, commit to them. So what are some pluses that people often appeal to with cheating. There gotta be some, otherwise people wouldn't cheat, if it was all negative. So what are the positive things?
Curiosity.
Yeah, people are curious, which of course killed the cat and gave the cat the herpes. But this is an old saying, curiosity gave the cat herpes, isn't it? That's a saying, right?
It's a little fresh, so
Yeah, it's something new.
it's fun.
Yeah, and fun. Make it sound awesome. Kind of advertising campaign. It's fresh, it's new, it's fun. Cheating.
It provides variety.
Yeah, variety. Yeah, and people also do it for, well, I mean, people often cheat for the physical stuff, you know, fun, etc. And sometimes people do it for emotional reasons. You're not getting, you know, the emotional satisfaction at home or in their relationship, and so they want that somewhere else. Yeah, and so those are things that people often point to, you know, curiosity, the fun, the newness, etc. And people, you know, in terms of like why people stay in a relationship is, well, cheating, you know, sometimes people are asked like, well, why not just like end the relationship? And people often don't because they are getting something out of their existing relationship that they don't want to give up, but they get something extra from the, you know, the cheating. Sometimes it's like financial security or even emotional security. Some people have emotional security, but they cheat for the physical stuff, or vice versa. Yeah, so there's a wide range of pluses. Now, on the minus side, what are some of the minuses, the negatives, the harms? Well, some of them brought up already. You brought up destruction of trust, which typically often leads to the end of the relationship. Well, and then often, how do people respond when they find out they've been cheating on? Are they like happy? No, I mean there's emotional damage to the person. You know, they're hurt, and they might decide to do what?
Kill them.
Yeah, share the pain. Perhaps some death, or property damage. You know, like Tiger Woods' wife. You know, taking the 9-iron to his, I think it was a 9-iron, to his SUV, busting that up. Yeah. Destruction of property, keying of cars, that type of stuff. There's also, what I mentioned, the STDs, unwanted pregnancies, you know, so all sorts of potential problems. And so that would lay out the positives and the negatives. Then the third step is weighing them. Weighing one against the other. So the idea would be to look at it in terms of which has more weight. Do the positives outweigh the negatives, or do the negatives outweigh the positives? Now, let's go, for the sake of the argument, let's go negative, and say that the negatives outweigh the positives. And what a person could say is, well, you know, to make the case, the person might say, well, for all the newness, freshness, fun, etc., that doesn't outweigh the damage done. You know, that the shattering of trust, the risk of disease, the potential emotional damage, the possibility of being killed, and that's a thing that does happen. Does happen not super often, but often enough. And so a person could say, well, you know, disease, death, destruction of relationship, like, you know, all that bad stuff, well, not worth it. And the thing to do would be lay out like why this is worth more than that. And of course you could do it the opposite way. A person could argue, and people do cheat, so presumably if they thought about it, they regard the pluses outweighing the minuses. Now the fourth step is bringing in the moral aspect. And again, that's pretty straightforward. The easiest way to do this is just appeal to John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism and, you know, essentially argument from authority. John Stuart Mill argued at great length in utilitarianism why morality should be based on assessing the consequences of actions. This seems intuitively appealing, therefore moral assessment can reasonably be done based on assessing the consequences. I have shown that the negative consequences outweigh the positive, therefore cheating would be morally wrong. So that would be how to build the argument. Now, what if you're on the receiving end of the appeal to consequences? Or, in the paper, you know, you've got to raise that objection and reply to it. What are ways to respond to this, to object to it? Well, one option, and there are many options, which makes this really good because you can, build an appeal to consequences, and then you have a very ready-made way to do your objection section. In fact, when I write for 3 blogs, no, 4 now. And I gotta crank out a lot of stuff. I have to crank out, lots of words, 3,000 or more per week. And and sometimes it's like, wow, what do I do? And I say, appeal to consequences, save the day again. I just go and look at the news, and there's always something awful happening. I take a side, we're all at appeal to consequences, done. Super easy. And then objection, words done, blog up. On to the next one. Then put it all in a book, put the book out, sell more books. Repeat until I die. That's the plan. Now, so one option is to go after the pluses and minuses. So what a person might do, just like when you're considering buying anything, a way to object might be, well, these are not all the pluses. Some have been left out. Or these are not all the minuses. Some have been left out. Or someone might argue that these pluses really aren't pluses. Or these minuses really aren't minuses. So you could argue it out based on the pluses and minuses. That's one option. A second option is to go after the weighing of things. And this is a very plausible way to consider it, because we might all agree that these are all positives. We might all agree that all these are negatives, and no one wants to be killed or have their stuff broken, and that everyone likes, new stuff and fun stuff, etc. But we might disagree on which way is more. And people can rationally disagree on that. To use the example of cheating, one person might have a value set such that they value stability, loyalty, a committed relationship, a person they know they can trust, as opposed to excitement, newness, fun, adventure. And so they would weigh these differently. Another person might be all about, newness and fun, and not really into long-lasting relationships, not really concerned about how other people feel. And so in their view, the positives may far outweigh the negatives. To use a non-moral example, think about picking majors. You could have two, people who are both very rational, intelligent, and they could both pick different majors by weighing things differently, and both make good decisions. For example, if you have a person who's very concerned about income, chance of getting a job, and likelihood of employment, they probably shouldn't pick certain majors. Because, they're not going to pay like a huge amount. You could. Take, for example, philosophy. If you become a philosophy professor, you're not going to make like a huge amount of money. But if you become if you get a philosophy degree and go to Silicon Valley and do a startup, then you could probably make a lot of money. But if you want sort of like high chance of being hired, solid degree, etc., you might go into engineering. If you're an engineer, you're not guaranteed a job, but it's pretty likely. And of course, people weigh things also differently in terms of what they like to do in school. For example, if someone really likes challenging, difficult classes, a lot of engineering and math, and physics, engineering. If someone really finds math really boring, probably shouldn't do engineering. And so people can weigh things differently based on their values. So one way to respond is a different way. So someone might say, for example, go with this example, they might say, well, if a person likes adventure and so forth and doesn't value this stuff that much, they would regard the positives outweighing the negatives. You can also bring the weighing other factors. For example, much of the negatives from cheating obviously come from getting caught and not using proper protection. The thing about violating, breaking trust, emotional damage, property damage, and death all requires the person get caught. Also, the STDs, the unplanned pregnancies, requires the person doesn't use proper protection. So what a person could argue is that if someone could get away with it, not get caught, and they use proper precautions, this would change the weighing. then you might say, well, these all come about based on lack of caution, lack of planning, lack of protection. Once those are taken care of through those appropriate means, then this far outweighs that. And that'd be a way of countering it as well. So the main counters are, first one is, you could argue that factors should be added or subtracted. Secondly, you can argue an alternative weighing, which weighs more based on different set of values. And of course, you can also try to like qualify the weighing. Say like, well, if people get caught, this is what happens, but that can be offset by proper precautions. Now to respond to the response, the same tactics apply. The way you do if you are arguing, say that cheating is wrong, and saying the negatives over the positives, and then you consider an objection, like people argue they wouldn't get caught, avoiding the negative. A person's value set may be such they value this more than this. Then the next step would be to reply to that. Now, how can one reply to the objection? Well, these things arise because people get caught or don't take precautions. As long as you're careful, it's going to be great. How can one reply to that? Well, how often do cheaters get caught?
50-50.
Oh, we don't know for sure, because I mean, people who don't get caught, you never know.
Yeah.
But people get caught a lot. I mean, it's kind of like, to use an analogy, it's like people who smoke pot. They think no one knows they're high. You know, they're like, I'm fooling everybody. But everyone knows. They're fooling nobody but themselves. Everyone else, people just are not pointing it out. And same with, with cheating. I know, like, not my own case, but I know from like other people that I know that everyone knows in the group. I mean, if you're in a group and someone's cheating, everyone knows. You just know. If the person behaves differently, it's like, oh, those two people are spending a lot of time together, and a lot of time, and they're often very sweaty. So, yeah, something's going on. And so, when people think they're not going to get caught, they're too smart to get caught, they're usually getting caught. Usually wrong. People do know. Now, again, maybe there are people who never get caught. They're so slick and smooth, they can account for all that time. They are able to coordinate everything. The person that they're cheating with, will never expose them. But, I mean, just think of the practicalities. You got to take account of like the time that's being done, being around another person, expenses, etc. And people aren't as smart as they think they are, so they probably would get caught. Now, as far as using protection, always good advice, but is that 100%? No. So things could go wrong. So one way to counter that is, no matter how careful someone is, this stuff, they'll probably get caught. I mean, even Bill Clinton, smart guy, got caught. Most politicians get caught. Most non-politicians get caught. But again, one way a person could argue against that, though, is say, well, we only know that people aren't good at not getting caught. And there could be people out there that we don't know about that are not getting caught. Because we wouldn't know about them. They wouldn't get caught. We just wouldn't know. It'd be like the person who could be totally high, and you'd never know, because you'd never know. Now, going to the thing about weighing it, one way to counter it is, again, to argue why that assessment is mistaken. For example, you might say, if a person says, well, living for the newness, the curiosity, the fun, the adventure, the excitement, that far outweighs all this other stuff. A committed, stable relationship. And one way to counter that back might be saying, well, this does seem like fun, but you draw an analogy. You could say, this is like eating dessert all the time, which, is initially kind of fun, but after a while, what happens if you're just eating this? Yeah, it's, you feel kind of sick because it's just, went away too fun. And, a committed relationship may lack like all the newness and, all the curiosity and excitement, but it's kind of like, like a good stable meal. It's not as exciting as the dessert, but this is better for you and lasts far longer. And so you could argue that, and you could also counter by saying, well, if a person just values this stuff, they shouldn't be in relationships anyways. You know, they shouldn't be cheating, they should just be, yeah, just swinging. Because swinging is, yeah, swinging. It's, you know, it's cheating without being, it's not even cheating because you're not in a relationship. Yeah. I assume there must be like a new term for it these days, besides swing. Because swing is like an old, that's like a 60s term. Hooking up, I think that's the new thing. Yeah, friends with benefits, I guess. That's still a thing? Yeah. I don't know if it's still a thing or not, but I assume there'd be some kind of new phrase for that. Because every generation has like a new thing. Because it used to be swinging, hooking up, friends with benefits. Nothing new. Someone's gonna work on that. Need a new term. Okay, so that's how to present the appeal to consequences and how to argue against it. So again, here's a quick template. If you sitting there and working your paper and like, crap, I don't know what to do. What you do is take your issue, then ask yourself, okay, what's my position? Take a position. Or if you don't know, you can say, okay, what are all the pluses of this? Like, what are the pluses of, well, let's take another example. Recently, a Democrat from Colorado, this guy, Jared Polis, they had a hearing in the House about the issue of sexual assault on campus. And Mr. Polis proposed a lower standard of basically, not really conviction, but finding people guilty. Currently, most public universities, the standard is called preponderance of evidence. That's to say, if somebody is accused of sexual assault, and they go through the, of course it's a crime, so it would go to, to police as well. But at the university level, these are preponderance of evidence. That's to say, it's more likely the person is guilty than not. And that's pretty much the current standard used today. What Mr. Polis proposed is that the standard be lowered, down to initially said to about a 20 to 30%, chance of being guilty. And then he lowered that even further, but he said, well, if you have, say, 10 people who are accused of sexual assault and 1 or 2 of them are guilty, it's better to get rid of all 10 of them. And so basically what he was laying out as a standard is if there's like a 10% or 20% chance someone is guilty, then they should be treated as if they should be found guilty. And someone raised the obvious thing like, well, wouldn't that be bad for the innocent people? And his reply was, well, it's not like we're not like depriving them of life or liberty, they just transfer to another school. And so looking at the appeal to consequence, the thing to do would be, well, let's look at that scenario. On the plus side, what would we have? What would be the plus to, the issue is whether it's morally acceptable to lower, at the university level, lower the standard from more likely to be guilty than not to, say, 10 to 20% chance, which means even the person is almost certainly innocent, but not certainly innocent, they should still be treated as guilty. In other words, you need almost certainty of innocence to not, convict. Well, on the plus side, what would be the pluses of having a very low conviction threshold?
Maybe less less incidents of
Yeah.
sexual assaults.
Yeah, it might have a deterrent. So if a person thinks all that takes is just an accusation, there doesn't have to be like any actual evidence. People may be deterred. They'd be afraid to do anything that could get them into trouble. Yeah, so the deterrence value can be seen as probably the main thing. Now, what's done? Any other pluses? I guess the main purpose is deterrence. And you could say this sort of other things. There'd be less assault, so it'd be much better for people who are assaulted. It would actually be better for people who would be assaulters because they're not assaulting people, so they don't get in trouble. So better for everybody. Now, what's on the minus side? What are some negatives?
The innocent people get convicted for no reason.
Yeah, you might have a 90, 80 to 90% of the people kicked out of school are innocent, and so having a very high level of that would have very negative consequences because innocent people would be punished, and of course that would have the negative result of many more people being booted out of school. I mean, he does say, well, it's not like we're killing them or locking them up. They're switching schools, but of course,
That's gonna follow you.
yeah. I mean, it's on you, as they say, it's on your permanent record. And if someone says, why you're applying, and someone says, well, I was convicted of sexual assault because there's a 10% chance that I might have been guilty. Well, they might think, well, we don't want these people on our campus. And even if the person does get accepted, that can involve, basically starting their whole academic life over. If it happens mid-semester, and especially since there's a 89% chance the person is innocent. So it'd be for every guilty person you get, you might have 9 innocent people punished, and that would have pretty serious consequences. And of course, people would not have much faith in a system that punishes at a If you think about it, you'd say, well, how does this judicial system work? Well, if there's even a chance you're guilty, you're guilty, and that would seem pretty extreme. So you can say the negative consequences far outweigh the positive. Now, of course, a person could counter that. They could argue and reply, well, focus on the deterrence thing. So 9 innocent people get punished, but at least we're making campuses safer by winnowing out. We take out 10 people, we might catch 1 or 2 bad people, and ruining the life of 9 innocent people, or damaging the life of 9 innocent people. And that's worth it, the person might say. Or someone might say, well, the crime is so terrible that it's worth punishing at such a high rate, even if we're catching innocent people. And one way to reply to that is, well, you could use an analogy. What if we adopted that, apply the same reasoning in society as a whole? If you go into I go to my jury duty, the judge says, well, we used to have this, innocent until proven guilty, and we had to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. But now we're going to go with, they might be guilty. That's good enough. Well, would that be a good system? No, because you have just so many innocent people being punished, being harmed, that people would lose all confidence in the legal. We already have not a lot of confidence in the legal system, but we'd lose pretty much all confidence. Because anybody would know if they are brought in, there's a 90% chance even if they're innocent, that they'll be convicted. And so, in that case, it would seem reasonable to go with that should not be the standard. Okay, so that's the appeal to consequences. One last thing. Now, suppose you want to respond to appeal to consequences without going through the appeal to consequences method. Well, an alternative approach is to use another method to counter it. For example, one common way to reply to an appeal to consequences is a method we'll look at in just a bit, called the appeal to rights. So, for example, if someone argues, well, having the threshold for conviction at the university system down to there's a chance they did it would result in greater deterrence, so it's good. A person may argue and say, well, this isn't about the consequences. We need to argue about rights, that people have a right to a just process. And a system in which the assumption is on guilt and the conviction threshold is 10 or 20%, that violates a basic right, a right to justice, in which people are only punished when they are likely to be guilty. And so you could do an appeal to rights to counter it, or an appeal to rules, as we'll see. So that's the dreaded appeal to consequences. Again, very straightforward thing to do. Lay out the positive, lay out the negative, weigh them, put in the moral link, draw the appropriate conclusion. When going to the objection, you can object by either adding or subtracting from here, arguing for a different weighing of them, one outweighing the other, or you can put add a new condition, like the example, the cheater who thinks they're not going to get caught. And the way to respond back to that is, of course, to argue that the original weighing was correct, the original pluses and minuses were correct. Okay, before pressing on briefly to the next one, anything about appeal to consequences that needs more stuff?
Can you please repeat how would you imply?
Oh.
In a short,
Oh, sure. Once the appeal to consequences is presented, one way to respond or object to it is, first option is, you could argue that there should be things added or taken from the plus or minus columns.
okay.
So someone might say that, Well, like for example, suppose someone has a, suppose we're talking about a major, and someone says, well, one of the pluses is your chance of being employed is much higher than any other field. And a person might argue, well, that's not actually true, so that's not a plus. Or someone may say there's people are leaving out some of the minuses. For example, if someone says, oh, if we lower the threshold for conviction down to, yeah, they might have done it, slight chance, then that would have a high deterrence value, and there's really no negative consequences. A person might respond to that by saying, yeah, there actually are, namely all the harm done to the innocent people. The second way to reply is the way, to argue which one outweighs the other. So if the initial one was the pluses outweigh the minuses, to respond to that, you'd argue the reverse is true. The minuses outweigh the pluses. And those are basically the three main ways. And in some cases, you may be able to bring in like another consideration. Like with a cheating case, someone might say, well, this assumes that a person gets caught. But if they don't get caught, then these are minuses. And then kind of the fourth way is to use like another method. Like for example, if we're going with the lower conviction thing, you might counter that not by appeal to consequences, you might respond by arguing people have a right to actual justice. Namely, they have a right to only be punished when it's likely that they are guilty, not just there's a slight chance they're guilty. Yes. Okay, anything else before going on? Okay. Struggle over the slide. Yeah, the weird thing is it actually hurts the least when I'm running. So running's fine. I can always run. It's like walking and stuff that's painful, but it'll clear up in a while. Got my pain patch on the back. Peanut butter and marshmallow fluff just stuck on the back there. No, that's not true. The appeal to rules is also a pretty useful method. Now, the foundation for this, theoretically, is what's called deontology. And deontology is a philosophical view, a moral view, at least the version we'll look at with our good dead friend Immanuel Kant, is that what is morally correct is defined by the true set of moral rules. And following those rules is right. So if an action is in accord with the rules, it's good. If an action breaks the rules, it's bad. And if there's no rule covering it, the action is morally neutral. And when we look at our good dead friend Immanuel Kant, we'll see, this theory in action. Now the method is pretty straightforward. Step one, present the rule. Step two, apply the rule to whatever it is you're applying it to. The conclusion then is, if it breaks the rule, it's wrong, or if it follows the rule, it's right, or if there's no, well, you'd have a rule, of course, but if you argue there is actually no rule, it'd be neutral. So again, the thing is basically, step one, rule. Step two, apply the rule to whatever it is you're talking about. Conclusion, draw the appropriate, it's right or it's wrong. Now, the reason why, of course, we have this fine, high-quality graphic here is because a good example of rule-based morality is most religions. They are typically deontological views. If you take the 10 Commandments, here are 10 rules. And they're based on breaking the rule is bad, and following the rule is right. And this is in direct contrast to appeals to consequences. So, for example, the commandments don't say, thou shalt not commit adultery, unless the person is really hot, and you'll have a lot of fun. It just straight up, rule. Don't break the rule. Now, how do you go about, getting rules for this method? Well, a real easy way to do this is to find pre-existing rules. One very common way to do this, probably the, sort of easy mode, is this. As I mentioned, religion is chock full of rules. So one sort of easy way to make this happen is you pull a rule out of religion. And for example, let's go back to the case on cheating. One way you could do appeal to rules with cheating is you could go to the Ten Commandments, and one of the commandments says, what about adultery?
So not commit adultery.
Yeah, none of that stuff. Not even if the neighbor is really hot. Yeah, so no adultery. Now, of course, that's a religious rule. So what we need to do is find some way to make it into a moral rule. And what we can do to make that happen is use applying moral theory. We saw back in the ancient days a little while ago, divine command theory. It's a really useful theory because what it lets you do is go from what's in the religion to what is morally correct or incorrect. So you could say, according to the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not commit adultery. According to divine command theory, what God commands is good because he commands it. What he forbids is bad because he forbids it. We've established that God forbids adultery, therefore adultery is morally wrong. So, done. Another example, I actually did a essay on this, on lobster. Suppose one wants to argue about the ethics of eating lobster. Well, if you go into the book of Leviticus, Leviticus says shellfish is an abomination. Lobsters, of course, are shellfish, therefore they're abominations. So under divine command theory, shellfish are forbidden, what is written by God is wrong, therefore eating lobster is wrong. As I mentioned before, Red Lobster is the main purveyor of seafood, and who else is red? The devil. Satan is red. He's a bad guy. So, yeah, Red Lobster, I guess, would be the devil. That's just good logic. Just good logic. And lobsters are really red when you cook them to show that they're taking you to hell. That's how it goes. That's how it works. And that would be a moral argument against eating lobster through the power of divine command theory. Now, where else? Suppose you have someone who's not particularly religious. They don't want to go to Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism, etc. They just need some rules. Well, our good dead friend Immanuel Kant has a system called, his thing is called the categorical imperative. It's a rule-making machine. And you can use rules that are not religiously based. You can go to Immanuel Kant and use his rules. Another option is to use, and we'll close with this, is to use legalism. Legalism does with law what divine command theory does with religion. Legalism is the view that what is legal is good, and what is illegal is bad. So you could say, suppose you want to do an argument about marijuana. You could say, well, according to the law, federal law, marijuana is illegal. Under legalism, what is illegal is wrong. Therefore, you smoke marijuana is wrong. Easily done. Next time, we'll pick up with how to respond to this method with our next exciting adventures on Friday in ethics. So we'll finish with appeal to rules, appeal to rights, mixing norms, and it shall be the end, not of all things, but of part one.